And a small but significant win for the Biden administration. A judge is temporarily blocking part of Ohio's strict new abortion ban, and it's set to take effect today. The federal government sued Idaho earlier this month to protect reproductive rights after the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade in June. Attorney General Merrick Garland says the new law violated part of the federal law. NBC News legal analyst Danny Cevallos joins us now. Danny, what exactly is this Idaho law? What does it mean for the rest of us?
The state Idaho law outlaws abortion, basically, and at the same time, you have a federal law, the EMTALA. It's also called the anti-dumping law, but it requires that a hospital with an emergency room that accepts federal funds must stabilize and screen someone who comes to the emergency room. So the argument here is that this federal law requiring stabilization and this Idaho law outlawing abortion come into conflict with each other when the abortion is necessary, for example, to stabilize the patient as required by federal law. So, under the Supremacy Clause and as recognized by the judge, the Constitution requires that where the federal government the federal law and the state law conflict, if the federal law is intended to occupy the field, the state law loses. For that reason, the judge concluded that the federal government is likely to win, and that's why the judge issued what's called an injunction, a pause, preventing this law from being used.
But in everyday terms, I mean, some people are arguing that basically this is forcing doctors to do the opposite of what they're supposed to do. When they put on those white coats, they promise the medical version of protect and serve. Basically, we will do no harm. We will help those who come into our path. What kind of legal sort of can of worms does this now present?
The judge actually observes exactly that challenge, that in the scary moments in the emergency room, a doctor would have to consider whether or not, well, is this abortion medically necessary? Because that's the only way it's allowed under the Idaho law. Or is it just really good for the patient or something that is medically indicated? And now that doctor would have to use that as a defense in a criminal prosecution. That is the position that this Idaho law is going to put doctors in when they're in the emergency room, considering whether or not to give life-sustaining care and stabilize patients as they're required to under federal law.
So, Danny, briefly, tell me about precedent here. I mean, does this sort of provide a blueprint for the Department of Justice when it comes to handling reproductive rights?
Yes and no. It's not a means to overturn Dobbs. As the judge recognizes, that's essentially settled law for now. However, in cases where this law, and it may be narrow situations, but in cases where an abortion is necessary to comply with federal law, and that is screening and stabilization, then possibly that might be a narrow exception to a state's ability to outlaw abortion.
But only in that very kind of small sliver of a case.
In that sliver. Dobbs is not threatened at all by this litigation, and the judge acknowledges that. That is and I'm using a quote, bygone decision. It's already past us. We're moving forward, according to this judge.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.